Welcome to the Korea Research Channel.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today.
Before we unpack today's deep dive, please take a second to hit like and subscribe to the channel.
It really helps us keep bringing you these detailed breakdowns.
It definitely does. So today, we are looking at a situation that, frankly, makes absolutely no sense on paper.
Right. If you just look at the raw data, it feels like a typo.
Exactly. Like, imagine you're reading the global financial news right now, April 2026.
Okay.
You see headlines about an ongoing conflict in the Middle East. You see surging global exchange rates, right?
Yeah, and stubbornly high oil prices.
Right. And logistics supply chains that are just completely tied in knots.
It's basically a perfect storm of macroeconomic gloom.
So, based on that, you would assume every major export-driven economy is, battening down the hatches, preparing for a totally miserable quarter.
You would think so. I mean, that is what the historical playbook says should happen.
But then you look at South Korea's trade data from our stack of sources today.
And it tells a completely different story.
Yeah, instead of shrinking, this single nation is posting absolutely record-breaking export numbers.
Which is completely defying global economic gravity.
So our mission for you today is to pull apart this impossible scenario. We are going to find out how South Korea is pulling this off.
And what the single secret weapon carrying their entire economy actually is.
Right, and what this massive pivot means for the rest of the world.
Because the headline numbers we're looking at are staggering, for sure. But diving into the underlying economic analyses and trade reports reveals a far more complex reality.
Oh, definitely. It's not all sunshine.
No, not at all. This is not a broad, nationwide economic miracle where every single industry is thriving in harmony.
It's actually a highly precarious balancing act, isn't it?
Exactly. So we need to explore the mechanics behind these exports, like why the global demand for one specific technology is currently overriding all other economic logic.
And more importantly, we need to examine the massive hidden vulnerabilities that are lurking right beneath the surface of this historic boom.
Right, because there is a lot of risk there.
Let's start with the external environment, because understanding how bad things are globally really frames how insane Korea's numbers are.
Yeah, the global headwinds right now are just relentless.
We have the Middle East conflict, which immediately impacts global energy markets.
And we are seeing severe exchange rate fluctuations.
Which usually terrify international buyers. Right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Plus, high oil prices are putting a direct squeeze on manufacturing costs everywhere.
And on top of all that, there are massive logistics disruptions and raw material supply emergencies.
Like I said, a thick cloud of macroeconomic gloom.
Under those specific conditions, a nation like South Korea, which relies heavily on importing raw materials, right, and processing them.
And then exporting the finished goods. Yeah, they traditionally take a massive hit.
Right, because when global shipping lanes are choked and energy is expensive, the cost of Korean manufacturing spikes.
Simultaneously, the purchasing power of their international trading partners usually drops due to that exact same inflation.
So again, the playbook says their export numbers should shrink significantly.
But the April trade data makes you do a double take.
It really does. Because despite every single one of those external pressures, South Korea posted $85.89 billion in exports for April.
That is just a staggering number.
Right. And this isn't some weird, isolated, one-month accounting glitch either.
No, that marks 2 consecutive months over the $80 billion mark.
Because they had that all-time national record of $86.6 billion in March.
Exactly. It's the highest April export figure in the entirety of South Korean history.
We are talking about 11 consecutive months of positive growth.
Which is wild.
So looking at the mechanisms here, how does a country punch through that thick cloud of global gloom and deliver historical highs? It's like a runner breaking a world sprint record while running directly into hurricane-force winds.
That's a great analogy. And the data points to a massive structural shift rather than just a general economic recovery.
What do you mean by structural shift?
Well, the Korean economy isn't bouncing back across the board. The global logistics issues haven't magically resolved, right?
Right, and energy costs are still a huge burden.
Exactly. What is happening is that the international demand for one specific foundational technology has become so unbelievably intense.
Like a gravitational pull.
Yes, a pull strong enough to overpower all of those macroeconomic headwinds combined.
Let's reveal what that foundational technology is, because it is the undisputed MVP of this deep dive.
We are talking about semiconductors.
Semiconductors. I mean, when we break down the source data behind those record billions, the semiconductor sector isn't merely contributing to a healthy export portfolio.
No, it is the sole engine dragging the rest of the numbers
The
upward.
statistics on this are heavy, but they are so crucial to understand the scale of what's happening.
Run through the numbers for us.
Okay, so in April alone, semiconductor exports hit $31.9 billion.
Wow.
Yeah, that is a 173.5% surge compared to the exact same month last year.
So they more than doubled.
Almost tripled, really, and they just missed beating their all-time monthly record set in March, but it is still the second consecutive month above that $30 billion threshold.
And they've now established 13 consecutive monthly all-time records.
But here is the statistic from our research that genuinely made me stop reading and reread the paragraph.
The concentration metric.
Yes, semiconductors alone accounted for 37.14% of South Korea's total April export value.
Let that sink in. Over 37% of a major, highly industrialized nation's export revenue is now derived from a single product category.
Right, and that is the defining metric we really need to analyze today.
Because it's unprecedented.
Wait, I need to stop and challenge the premise here, that this is a purely positive story.
Go for it.
When I think of South Korea's traditional industrial might, I think of the massive container ships they build in Ulsan.
Right. Heavy industry.
Yeah, and I think of the millions of cars they export globally. I think of their massive steel industry and consumer electronics.
All traditional pillars.
So are you saying nearly 4 out of every $10 making up this historic national export boom is coming from just one single product category?
That is exactly what the data shows.
Look, if I put 37% of my entire retirement portfolio into one highly volatile tech stock, a financial advisor would call me reckless.
Oh, they would absolutely panic.
Right.
Yeah.
So how is this level of concentration a victory for an entire country?
Well, from a purely risk management perspective, it is terrifying.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, you're spot on. We will get into those specific structural vulnerabilities shortly. But to understand why the numbers look like this right now, we have to look at what is happening globally.
Okay.
Because this is not a normal consumer business cycle. This isn't about people buying slightly more smartphones or upgrading their laptops this year.
What is it about then?
The global tech industry has basically entered a frantic, almost desperate land grab for compute power.
I want to look at the pricing data to illustrate that desperation, actually, because there is a specific detail in the source material that acts as a perfect thermometer for this market fever.
The memory chip pricing.
Yeah. The price of a DDR4 8-gigabit memory chip, which is a standard component,
Right.
in April of last year, that specific chip cost $1.65.
You're cheap.
But recently, that exact same chip skyrocketed to $16.
$16 from $1.65.
Yeah. That is an 869.7% jump in a single year.
Which is just absurd.
To put that in perspective for you listening, imagine walking into your local cafe and your morning coffee, which cost $2 yesterday, suddenly costs $19 today.
And people are still lining up around the block to buy it.
Exactly. That tells you instantly that demand has completely detached from normal supply.
And the context around that specific DDR4 chip makes the 870% price jump even more remarkable.
Oh, so?
Well, DDR4 is actually a slightly older generation of memory standard. The cutting edge right now is DDR5 and high bandwidth memory, or HBM.
Oh, so they aren't even fighting over the newest stuff.
Right. When you see the price of a standard, slightly older component explode by nearly 900%, you are witnessing pure supply chain desperation.
Wow.
Companies are hoarding any viable compute and memory capacity they can get their hands on because the manufacturing lines are entirely consumed by the demands of artificial intelligence.
Let's break down that AI connection. Because the boom ignited by generative AI platforms like ChatGPT has obviously moved far beyond just being an interesting software story.
It's an infrastructure story now.
Right. But why does a software boom trigger an 870% spike in hardware memory chips halfway across the world?
Because software doesn't exist in a vacuum, you know. It requires physical infrastructure. Training massive AI models, feeding them billions of parameters and running them at scale requires a colossal amount of processing power.
Right, the GPUs.
Exactly. But here is the mechanical bottleneck. You can possess the most advanced, expensive AI processor on the planet. But if that processor cannot access the data it needs to analyze instantaneously, it just sits idle.
It creates a massive data bottleneck.
Precisely.
It's like buying a multi-million-dollar Formula One race car, but then trying to drive it on a muddy, single-lane dirt road.
I love that analogy.
The car has the potential for incredible speed, but the road fundamentally restricts it.
That is a perfect way to visualize latency versus bandwidth in computing. The AI processors are the engine of that race car.
And the memory chips.
High-performance memory semiconductors, the kinds South Korea completely dominates, are the freshly paved, multi-lane highways. They provide the massive bandwidth required to feed data into the processors without any delay.
So global tech giants are essentially buying up every single inch of digital asphalt South Korea can produce to build out their massive AI data centers.
That's exactly what is happening.
Which brings us to a term the sources emphasize really heavily, the semiconductor supercycle.
Yes, the supercycle.
What exactly are the mechanics of a supercycle, for those who might not know?
A supercycle is a prolonged, multi-year period where a fundamental shift in technology drives global demand so far beyond existing manufacturing capacity that prices surge.
And they stay up there.
Right. They remain elevated for an extended duration. It fundamentally alters the baseline of the entire industry.
Have we seen this before?
Oh, yeah. We experienced a structural supercycle during the dawn of the personal computer era when businesses and homes globally suddenly required desktop hardware.
And smartphones too, I'd imagine.
Exactly. We saw another massive supercycle during the transition to smartphones. AI is currently the engine of this latest supercycle.
Got it.
And because AI requires server infrastructure on a scale that just dwarfs personal electronics, economists argue this could actually be the most powerful supercycle the hardware industry has ever seen.
So if we pause the narrative right here, we have an unprecedented technological supercycle driven by AI. We have standard memory chips jumping 870% in price, and South Korea's national export coffers are just overflowing with billions of dollars.
Literally overflowing.
Logically, you would assume everyday people in Seoul are experiencing an absolute economic golden age.
You would think they'd be popping champagne.
But the source material introduces a very harsh reality check. This macro-level victory is not translating to micro-level prosperity.
No, it is not. And this is where the narrative requires some careful uncoupling.
Let's uncouple it.
The headline numbers reflect the massive revenue of a few huge tech conglomerates. But we have to look at the mechanics of the broader domestic economy. Remember those global headwinds we established at the beginning?
The surging exchange rates, the high global oil prices, the logistics disruptions.
Right. The macroeconomic gloom that the semiconductor exports are supposedly defying.
Okay, promise you.
The semiconductor industry might be punching through that gloom, but those external pressures are still actively battering the rest of the South Korean economy.
Because South Korea imports so much of what it actually needs to survive on a daily basis.
Yeah. Exactly. They import the vast majority of their energy and a significant portion of their food. When global oil prices rise, and when the U.S. dollar is exceptionally strong compared to the local Korean one.
The cost of importing those basic necessities just skyrockets.
It does.
Let's walk through the actual mechanism of how that plays out for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because the semiconductor giants are selling their chips globally, primarily pricing them in U.S. dollars.
Right.
So a strong dollar actually benefits their bottom line when they convert those profits back into won.
They get more local currency for every dollar they earn.
But for the local bakery owner in Seoul, or just a family trying to buy groceries, a strong dollar means the imported wheat, the imported beef, and the imported natural gas used to heat their homes all become dramatically more expensive.
The local currency just doesn't go as far.
So we have a situation of poverty amid plenty.
That is a very accurate way to describe it.
The semiconductor industry is a raging bonfire of cash, but the warmth isn't reaching the rest of the house.
Yes. The warmth is trapped inside a single, highly specialized room. The millions of workers and thousands of businesses operating outside the tech ecosystem are feeling the full crushing weight of imported inflation.
Without receiving any of the windfall from the export boom.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to my earlier concern about that 37% statistic. We have a hyper-concentrated economy where one sector is masking the pain of all the others. Is this concentration actually a massive vulnerability?
The structural fragility is undeniably a ticking time bomb.
Because if the AI supercycle cools down.
Right, if the major tech companies suddenly decide they have built enough data centers for now, the entire Korean economy could suffer a cascading collapse.
Wow.
Relying on a single, historically cyclical industry to carry nearly 40% of an industrialized nation's export weight means that any demand shock in Silicon Valley will immediately trigger an economic earthquake in Seoul.
That is a terrifying prospect.
And our sources point to an even larger, more complex time bomb that the Korean government has very little direct control over.
The geopolitics.
Yes, the geopolitical tightrope.
This is a critical piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
And we want to be completely impartial here and stick strictly to the analysis provided in the sources regarding the current global power struggle.
Right, just looking at the facts on the ground.
Exactly. The text details a highly complex and intensifying tech rivalry between the United States and China. And it's specifically focused on semiconductor supply chains.
And South Korea is caught geographically and economically right in the middle of this tug of war.
Right.
To understand the precariousness of Korea's position, you really have to look at the mechanics of their supply chain.
Walk us through it.
So the United States largely controls the underlying intellectual property, the advanced design software, and the critical manufacturing equipment required to fabricate high-end chips.
Okay, so the blueprints and the tools.
Exactly. Without U.S. technology, Korea literally cannot physically manufacture its most advanced products.
But on the other side of the equation, China has historically been one of the largest consumer markets for Korean memory chips.
They buy massive quantities to fuel their own tech manufacturing.
Additionally, China is a dominant global supplier of the rare earth elements and raw materials necessary to build these components in the first place.
Therefore, Korea has profound, deeply entrenched dependencies on both superpowers.
So they need the U.S. to design and build them, and they need China for the raw materials and to actually buy a huge chunk of the finished product.
It's an incredibly difficult spot. Washington is actively utilizing export controls and policy measures to restrict advanced semiconductor technology from reaching Beijing, citing national security concerns.
And Beijing, in turn, utilizes its leverage over raw materials and market access.
Right, so Korea's economic lifeline, that $31 billion monthly revenue stream, is totally reliant on maintaining access to American technology while simultaneously managing its massive trade relationship with China.
It is the ultimate geopolitical tightrope walk.
One wrong step could be disastrous.
Yeah. I mean, a sudden policy shift, a new export control restriction from Washington, or a raw material embargo from Beijing could theoretically freeze a massive portion of Korea's export engine overnight.
Overnight, just like that.
So the celebratory headlines about breaking $80 billion in exports are real, and they are historically significant, but they exist within a shockingly fragile international ecosystem.
They really do. But despite these massive structural and geopolitical risks, the tone from trade economists analyzing the forward-looking data remains surprisingly bullish.
Really? Even with the time bombs?
Yeah. The South Korean government has laid out highly ambitious targets for the year.
What are you talking about?
They're aiming for $740 billion in total annual exports, with the explicit dual goal of breaking into the ranks of the top 5 global exporting nations.
$740 billion. Given the domestic inflation squeeze and the geopolitical minefield we just detailed, are those targets actually realistic, or is it just, political optimism?
Well, the consensus among trade analysts flashing a green light for these targets is rooted in their assessment of the AI industry.
Okay.
The dominant economic view is that artificial intelligence has crossed the Rubicon from being an experimental software trend to becoming the foundational infrastructure for the next generation of the global economy.
So it's not a fad, it's the new electricity.
Exactly. And because of that shift, they project the demand for high-performance memory will act as an unyielding pillar of support. They believe it will provide Korea with a multi-year runway of massive revenue.
But the sources are also very clear that Korea cannot simply coast on this semiconductor runway.
No, absolutely not. There is a massive homework assignment attached to these numbers.
Right. To securely reach and maintain that top 5 global exporter status, South Korea has to urgently diversify its broader trade ecosystem.
They have to use this current influx of cash to build out resilience in other sectors.
Like green energy, biotech, advanced manufacturing. They need those to cushion against the hidden risks we just talked about.
You simply cannot rely on a 37% concentration forever without eventually paying the price.
So the homework is clear.
The necessity of diversification is paramount. However, we also must acknowledge the sheer scale of the current achievement.
It is impressive.
Using these hidden risks as a springboard for growth and managing to punch through a literal wall of global economic gloom to deliver the highest export numbers in national history sends a profoundly positive signal about South Korea's economic trajectory.
It really demonstrates an exceptional ability to capitalize on global structural shifts.
It does.
It's an incredibly complex narrative. To bring all of this together, we are looking at a nation that is single-handedly defying a relentlessly gloomy global economic environment by riding the wave of an AI-powered semiconductor supercycle.
Riding it all the way to the bank.
They're posting record-breaking historic export numbers. But as we've uncovered, that success is a high-wire act. They are balancing a severe domestic inflation reality, where the massive wealth of the tech sector is not translating to affordable groceries for the everyday citizen.
While simultaneously navigating a highly volatile geopolitical battleground between the world's two largest superpowers?
It is a breathtaking economic performance, but one with zero margin for error.
Exactly.
This has been Korea Research. Please like and subscribe to the channel.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering question from the data to ponder.
Let's hear it.
If a single technological wave like AI is now powerful enough to dictate the economic resilience and export dominance of entire nations,
Yeah.
what happens to the countries that don't hold a piece of the hardware supply chain?
Wow.
Are we looking at a future where a nation's wealth is entirely determined by its server racks?